This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. First on the agenda, calling the meeting to order. One of the things that Frank just brought up that is going back to opening the meeting with some public comments. We have one participant here. If you would like to make any comments, there's an opportunity to do it now at the beginning of the meeting. 3 minutes. You know. Okay, sounds good. Okay. Next up is the consent agenda. Approval of the minutes from October 18th, 2022. Everybody have a chance to look that over? Anybody have any changes to it? What do we do with the consent agenda? Do we vote on that, or is it just?
Yeah.
Just good?
Just make a motion to approve it. Yeah.
Motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay, second. All in favor? Okay, consent agenda is adopted. The first thing we're going to do is talk about the planning board's role in the special use permit process. Frank, this item first came up when we had that special use permit regarding the storage facility, and it was a little squishy who did what at the time. And we were not, I would say as a board, we were not very comfortable with the fact that we had absolutely no input other than to just say, you know, it was consistent with the land use plan, when we all kind of felt like it wasn't consistent with the land use plan. Then we stumbled on that. Anyway, so we've that was, I think, probably back in April or May. It was pretty much, that was a while ago.
June,
Yeah. Anyway, so a lot's happened since then with SUPs. We did away with a lot of those SUPs as of last Board of Commissioners meeting. But now Mike wants to reintroduce a process where the planning board gets involved in the special use process. However, Frank ran this by, Frank, my understanding is that you already kind of had a position on what the planning board was doing with it, and you went to the attorney, and the attorney's response, if everybody read that, was pretty clear, right? That our job is to make a statement of consistency that it is within, that it's consistent with the land use plan. And that's kind of where we're at.
I think there's probably a couple of key points for you to take away from my comments and from the town attorney's comments. And so, like everything else, context is important. And so if you go back to the issue that you all were reviewing, the townhouse permit, townhouse special use permits, that was not driven by an SUP listed in your table of permitted and special uses. That was driven by that provision in the ordinance that said if it's not listed, you can process it as a special use permit.
Right.
And so I point that out to you because that's a key distinction for what I'm going to say next. When I talked with Brett DeSalms, the town attorney, and if you look at his memo, his position is that by virtue of it being listed as an SUP in your table of permitted and special uses, the town of Cape Carteret, through the planning board and through the Board of Commissioners, has already determined that it's reasonable and that it's consistent with the plan because it is permitted as long as it meets those conditions. So there's really no need for an additional decision to determine whether it's reasonable or consistent with the plan. So that's a key thing. I take that back to the townhouse permit issue that you all dealt with before I got here, because that was not the case. That was a result of that provision where it was not included in your table of permitted and special uses. It had that provision that said if it's not listed, you can run it as a special use permit. We've changed that now, as you all know, and as the Board of Commissioners adopted just the other day. So that's just a key distinction I think that you all need to consider. If it's listed, so we no longer will process something that is not listed on that table as a special use permit request unless it has the SUP in the table. And there's a total of, I think, 7 or 8 different things now that are in there. So with that said, everything that's in there, there already has been theoretically a statement of reasonableness and consistency with the plan. So I think what he's saying is you really don't need to be involved in making that determination going forward. That's kind of one, I guess, maybe practical issue. And there's the other concern that I've always been taught that you only have one public body involved in the review of a special use permit. And it really doesn't matter to me what body that is. It can be the Board of Commissioners, it could be the Planning Board, it could be the Board of Adjustment. It really is ultimately up to the elected officials to decide that in their ordinance. So that's the reason that I'm uncomfortable with having the Planning Board review an SUP request and then make a recommendation or statement or whatever to the governing body for that. And that's why Brett's uncomfortable with that as well. Doesn't mean there aren't communities that do that. It's a little bit of a risky proposition, I think. The other thing that I would say to you is that there is a very curious provision in the new chapter 160D in the general statutes that essentially says the planning board can talk about it, but whatever they talk about shouldn't be factored into the decision by the governing body, which makes no sense.
That is curious.
So I don't know where that came from. My recollection is that there wasn't a statement like that prior to the rewrite of Chapter 160D by the legislature in the last few years while I was gone. I don't know that for a fact, but it's a rather direct statement. But it essentially says, yeah, you can talk about it, but it really doesn't matter. So for all of those reasons, that's what my position is based on. And I think it's just a cleaner process and more consistent with the spirit and intent of the quasi-judicial process if you have one body reviewing it, making that decision. And again, it really doesn't matter to me whether it's the Board of Commissioners or the Planning Board, the Board of Adjustment, but I would just encourage you and all of us to pick one body and let them handle it. So.
Well, I personally would like to see the Planning Board remain advisory and not a decision-making body.
But Frank just said, the law says anything we advise shall be disregarded by the body making the determination.
Well, I don't know if that's, so I think what he's also saying is that this is what we have to talk about too.
That's right.
That's right. So,
well, I think there's different issues that you all deal with. So certainly if it is a rezoning or if it's a zoning ordinance text amendment, absolutely, there's a role for the advisory board in that process.
Right, but that's not SUP.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but the 160D directs us to provide the decision-making body with a statement of consistency. And in Brett's letter, it sounded like he also suggested providing, supporting information, not just say, yes, it's consistent or no, it's not consistent without providing some evidence of that.
Well, I think if you look at 160D, the references to consistency statement of reasonableness, those are referenced in the statutes with regard to things like rezonings or text amendments and those kind of traditional things. There's not necessarily a reference to that in the statutes with the SUP process. There's a very clear reference to that in our UDO where it talks about the special use permit process. So I actually made it a point to go through 160D and look for all of the references to statement of consistency and statement of reasonableness. And they were all pertaining to all the things that you should be commenting on, like rezonings or text amendments and those kind of things. So.
Mike?
Yeah, I'd like to take a few minutes and just go back a little bit on this. And I'd like to go back to, the history of this board. And I chaired the planning board for 7 years. I'm sitting on it now. I was a commissioner for 12 years. And basically, things were either permitted by right in our ordinance at that time, or we used conditional uses, but they were so infrequent. The only one I ever really remember was the old, it's now gone, the conditional use for the bed and breakfast down there in Bayshore. That was a conditional use. So if it was permitted by right and somebody wanted to do it and it wasn't something that was permitted, they had to get a variance, or if they wanted to do something different. And that's what our town has done for years, with the Board of Adjustment being running quasi judicial hearings on these things. And it seemed to work quite well. I mean, it was simple. About, I'd say a year ago, maybe even longer, and I can't remember when, the town manager at the time came to me and said, this UDO was on the horizon, but we hadn't seen a draft copy of it. He said to me, he says, well, when we get to new UDO, the planning board won't have much say in anything. And I didn't understand it because I didn't know anything about SUPs or those things, but he told me that. And so I started thinking about it. Well, what does that mean? We were always the advisory board. The planning board was the board, is today and was then the group that got into the weeds. The Board of Commissioners up here rarely, in my 12 years sitting up there, rarely get into the weeds. The motions are brought before them. There's limited discussion, but they don't get into the kind of discussions that we get into when something comes up like these SUPs. We wore that thing out, the SUPs. So anyway, so he said the planning board wouldn't have much of a role. I didn't understand what that meant until I read the entire ordinance, read about the SUPs, and those first two SUPs that we got, the one for the not condos, townhouses, and the one for the storage units over here. Under the old system, neither of those would have ever hit the floor unless somebody was applying for a variance. And it'd be very unlikely that a Board of Adjustment could grant a variance for those types of activities because they don't satisfy the 7 things that the Board of Adjustment is required to weigh in against. So
let me just clarify one thing for you that I think I might understand what you're saying. So the Board of Adjustment cannot issue a use variance. So they can issue variances to things like setbacks and other requirements.
Yes.
But they can't make a decision that this particular use is allowed in this zone. The only board that can make that decision is the Board of Commissioners with your recommendation through that legislative process. So
that's right.
The board, and I think that's what you were saying, but the Board of Adjustment, they don't decide whether or not a particular use is allowed or not allowed. That's the legislative process in our ordinance.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I started looking at this, and then we got into the business about when we did the storage units over there, that all we could issue was a statement of consistency. And I looked back through the ordinance, and of I think it's 81 permitted uses in the table of permitted uses, 67 of them have the SUPs. Now we've killed that. When I brought this up last spring, I had talked to town manager about whether we really want these, and he was in the same place I was with regard to the SUPs, and we did a marvelous job of really, I don't know how many is left, but it's certainly not 67. Sure. We made a remarkable thing. So I started looking at, where would we go from here? 75 to 80% of the problem is already solved by not having SUPs in the table of permitted use. And that was approved Monday night. Correct. So we're in good shape. So what do we do for the balance of them? as I looked through this, and believe it or not, I had made up my mind or want to make a recommendation before I even saw his letter. But I had talking to the town manager. I feel like that the remaining SUPs should be with a single unit. And that should be the Board of Adjustment. They are already trained in the quasi-judicial process of doing hearings and things like that. And they could make the call on a SUP, since really, as this is written, this planning board has almost no role.
But Mike, did you not hear the town manager say the Board of Adjustment cannot make a ruling on a change of use?
No, let me clarify. So in the earlier part of his conversation, when he was talking about the historical use of the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, I said that.
But going forward, the Board of Commissioners has three options for how special use permits can be handled.
Right.
They can delegate it to themselves, which
Yes.
is what they've done.
Yes.
They can delegate it to the planning board, or they can delegate it to the Board of Adjustment. So for example, if you all agreed with Mike's position that he just articulated, you might recommend to the Board of Commissioners that they amend the UDO and they delegate special use permits to the Board of Adjustment.
Yes. There's one other thing. All these notes I had here, I forgot one thing. I also read David Owen's treatise on SUPs. Now, this is written a few years back, but the key thing that I came out of that with this is of towns between 1,000 and 10,000, which we fall into with populations, that he surveyed the state, and 74% of the communities in that size had the planning board doing an advisory role in that SUP process. The Board of Adjustments had only 7% doing advisory, but 55% of them doing the final decisions on it. And the Board of Commissioners was 66. So now, a lot of the towns didn't respond, but that's when it really came to me. I said, this would be a lot cleaner with the Board of Adjustment doing this thing than the planning board, because we're running right up against a stone wall with what's written in the ordinance already. And this, and it would be my recommendation that, because I really want to see, for example, Susan alluded to it when she talked about those storage units. There was no real getting into the weeds on those things. That thing went up there and it was very brief discussion and it was passed. It was a non-conforming use. And on top of that, they added another section of row, which was an extension of a non-conforming use. And there was a little discussion on it. Had that been before the planning board in our traditional thing, we would have spent hours on it with people in here and the public being involved in it. So that's why I think that if the Board of Commissioners does it, they don't generally have these hearings where they get into the weeds with a lot of things. It might be better for the Board of Adjustment. So comments.
For the sake of transparency, can you ask, what was the discomfort that the attorney felt? What was it he was concerned about? Because I read it, I still didn't understand what.
Yeah, so essentially, I guess, Madam Chair, if you want me to respond, I'd be happy to. So essentially, when you process a special use permit application, you have to use a quasi-judicial process. And it basically is, the decision should be based on the evidence presented at that individual hearing held by whichever board is the decision-making authority. And when you start introducing other boards commenting on this and other dialogue that occurs, it runs the risk that the decision is not based on just the evidence presented at that hearing. It runs the risk that all of these other conversations come into play and affect the decision, puts it at some legal risk. Essentially, it's supposed to be run like a judicial proceeding. And so to maintain the integrity of that process, you keep it to that event, that group that's conducting the hearing for it. So I think that's the crux of it. You know, if you all recall, this was before I got here, but what I was told is that when that townhouse special use permit came to the Board of Commissioners, I think maybe at their June meeting, there was a change in the way the agenda was presented. The planning board chairperson's comments used to be near the beginning of the meeting. And for that particular meeting, they were pushed to after that. And I think some people were concerned about that, maybe offended about that. Well, that was deliberate by the town attorney because he was trying to protect the quasi-judicial process. And he was nervous that by having those comments and the planning board's review discussed before the actual quasi-judicial hearing conducted by the Board of Commissioners, that might taint the process in some way. So that's why he did that, which was very smart of him to do that because he's protecting the legal standing of the town going forward. But it's those kind of issues that you run up against. And so again, it really doesn't matter to me what body does it. I just would encourage all of us to pick one body to do it.
So why don't we, so it can be the planning board,
Could be,
it
yes.
can be the Board of Adjustments, and it can be the Board of Commissioners. But regardless of who it is, the decision of who that will be is left up to the Board of Commissioners.
Yes.
So why don't we ask the Board of Commissioners
Who you would want it to be.
what they want? We could provide, input on, what we think should happen.
Can I make one more comment?
Yeah.
Maybe we need some time to think about this. If you ask me, with all the studying I did in this, I would be willing to make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, but y'all might not be there yet. And what I would want to do is have the town manager craft the ordinance changes it would take to do that. But maybe for the rest of us, we ought to just kind of sit on it and bring it up next month and discuss it again after you have had an opportunity to look at some of these documents and think about this.
And I have, and I thought our manager's statements were concise and to the point, and those are exactly the options that he listed. Did you review this?
I read everything that there was to read on this.
And these are the three options. And she just said again, the three options are that the Board of Commissioners retain the existing process, whereby the Board of Commissioners is the decision-making authority, but also delete the reference to the planning board's involvement in section 819(2)(c)(1). Number two, amend the UDO such that the Board of Commissioners formally delegates decision-making authority for SUPs to the planning board. Now, that's like Congress passing on the ability to regulate to all these regulatory agencies, and I hope that's not going to happen. The third option is amend the UDO such that the Board of Commissioners formally delegates decision-making authority for SUPs to the Board of Adjustment. It's possible that they could kick it down the road, but I would hope that our elected officials, instead of appointed people like myself and all of us, the elected officials make the decision because only they are answerable to the voters.
Yeah, Paxton, but I think as a board, we should make a recommendation if we can.
Of course.
We talked about what happened with the townhomes, and Susan's brief got moved to the end. It was probably because it was before and we had sort of an idea of what we were looking at. But let's say that meeting never happened. Legally speaking, we never met, we never discussed about it. And then, I feel like the chair of the planning board should still be able to provide evidence to the board without, input from all of us. Because, we can talk about this as sort of like an after action report about that meeting. The evidence provided on both sides from the audience and the applicant, I wouldn't say wasn't very I don't know, factual, didn't have a whole lot of evidence. It's a lot of opinion from the, the people presenting. And some of the things I felt like the applicant, was saying could have had more things to back it up, or vice versa. So I feel like the one person who could provide evidence would be the chair of whoever the planning board.
And they're providing it in the meeting that they're going to make the decision.
Right.
Yeah.
And so she was given 3 minutes to present evidence, and I
Of
just didn't feel
3
like that
hours
was
worth of
sufficient.
work.
Yeah.
But
Does
if,
that make sense? Like if we didn't have a meeting about it, could we bypass that statement of, the 160B where you can't use any evidence from a planning board meeting, but the chair could provide evidence in the quasi judicial process?
Yeah, so what I would say to you is each one of you as residents of the town could come and provide testimony during the quasi judicial hearing. I think the sticking point is that you can't have another meeting to sort of preview and hash out these things because that decision is reserved for the evidence presented at the hearing by in this case, the Board of
I
Commissioners.
just don't feel like 3 minutes was adequate for chair of the planning
Yeah,
board.
and so, as you've heard me say in some of our previous meetings, I think it's a very frustrating process for all parties concerned. Personally, I really do not like that process, but it's an available tool for people to use. I would even submit to you that you have much more, you as planning board members, you have much more involvement in things when it is a legislative process, because you are hashing out the details and deciding, okay, we think car washes are not or should be a permitted use or should not be a permitted use or whatever the case may be. And you're having those detailed discussions at this level as part of that legislative process. So I personally think you have more involvement with the changes that we just made. And you all obviously had a lot of involvement in that part of it.
Question, Frank.
It's in the eye of the beholder, but absolutely. You, Sarah Wax, Susan Hall could come to the quasi judicial hearing and present your case.
do they,
But if we do that, are they representing this board or are they representing themselves as a citizen?
They're representing themselves as a citizen.
No.
That's different, and that's got nothing to do with this board.
Yeah.
That's right.
well, so what you're saying is we might have more interest because this is what we always do and to speak up in, but evidentiary hearings, okay? Certain persons are excluded from providing testimony in it. They have to have a stake in it or an interest in it.
Or
So would that,
the expert witness, be an expert.
Pardon?
Or be an expert witness.
right.
Yeah,
And
I
I don't know that in that hearing
from
that we
doing
would
it.
be able to speak.
I guess it depends on what your testimony is. I mean, if it's
Well, how do you
rooted in
know?
some-
If I want to talk about it, you don't know what my testimony is going to be until I get it out. And then they said, well, you shouldn't have done that. Disregard that. It's like in a judicial process when a witness says something inappropriate.
So I think that potential probably exists for every single person who comes up to speak during that quasi judicial hearing. And then ultimately the attorney has to counsel the Board of Commissioners appropriately and they have to make the decision. But again, I think the fundamental issue is that if you're going to use that process to make a decision, the decision should be made based on the evidence at that hearing. There shouldn't be a lot of other conversations going on. There shouldn't be conversations, for example, between a citizen and a governing body member before that hearing, or between a developer and a governing body member before that hearing. And so that's why it's the attorney's opinion, in my opinion, it's best reserved for just one body. And it can be the planning board, but I think one body.
Go ahead, you had a,
It's the difference. I just don't understand it. It doesn't seem logical to me. It's just legal. It's not logical, it's legal,
That's right.
which it doesn't,
That's right.
the two are not the same.
but
How can you go to a decision-making body without having done research, looked into things and made a decision? It's almost like evidence is just, you show up and you have it without gathering it. How can it all be done at that hearing?
Well, again, it's incumbent on individuals who have standing in the matter to do their homework. There are appropriate notices that
They
this
can
is
do
being
research,
considered.
but they're
Yeah,
not allowed to talk to anyone.
and present, well, they're allowed to talk to people at the hearing. So they're allowed to conduct their research or determine whatever positions they think are appropriate for the board to consider, but they should do that before the hearing. And and they should come to the hearing and express that to the full body at that time.
Right. So the violation would be when we get together as a board and communicate and hash the issue out, and then take that as a position to the board. That's the problem. Not that we bring our own individual opinions to the board or the results of our research.
That's right. The way the process works is you have the opportunity to participate individually, but you don't have the opportunity to participate as a group, as a formal group.
Okay.
Yeah, a simple way to look at this, I'm just piecing all this together. When an issue or facts are presented, is their ability to cross-examine. And you can't in that meeting, you can't cross-examine what we discuss. It's kind of hearsay. That's why I asked the question about, are we representing ourselves as a planning board or individual citizens? It makes a huge difference. And it kind of casts some doubt about
Well,
the
you can,
importance of this group.
in that evidentiary hearing, you can cross-examine, but you have to be somebody with standing to cross-examine another witness.
Yeah, I think you made a statement that it calls into question the importance of this group or the utility of this group. I would argue just the opposite. This group is the planning board. Your job is to engage in planning efforts to determine what the comprehensive plan should say, to determine what the town's development regulations look like on the front end. That's the planning board's responsibility. That is incredibly important.
I retract that statement. I'm going to limit it.
And I'm not
to
challenging, I want you to
themselves.
recognize there's tremendous value in this board here.
I was overly inclusive.
I understood what you meant.
There's probably not much value in the special use permit process, but there's great value in all of the other processes is maybe what I should have said.
Stand corrected.
And because we do our homework, we do care what happens. And yes, I agree. It's just unfortunate that some things are structured the way they are.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, I think the answer at this point is to go to the Board of Commissioners and ask them if they want that authority, that decision-making authority to remain with them. And if the answer is yes, then I guess we want to ask them too, what advice do you want from the planning board? I don't think there's any question in the minds of any of the boards of commissioners, or any of the commissioners rather, that the planning board does their homework. Like they know that. So they have that knowledge. They have to have that confidence in us to dig into the information, and then and ask them, what do you want from us? Do you want the decision making to remain with us? Do you want the decision making to remain with you? Do you want it with the Board of Adjustment? If the answer is that it remain with them, then I think we should ask them, what information do you need from us in order to make the best decision possible?
For the special use permit?
Just for special use. I think that's the only thing that's in question, right?
I don't think we can provide them anything if it stays with them.
No.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said, if the power stays with them, I don't think we can provide them any input whatsoever.
So we can't provide them with a statement of consistency?
Yeah, I think if we retain decision-making authority and the ability to conduct the hearing with the Board of Commissioners, then I think the planning board is just not involved in that, and the Board of Adjustment's not involved in that.
So not a statement of consistency.
Because if it's already listed as a special use permit, there's already been a statement of consistency and reasonableness to get it in the ordinance in the first place. The only reason that issue came up is because the provision that was being used for the townhouses was that sort of catch-all provision
Right.
that said, if it's not listed, you can apply for a special use permit. And we've changed that and
Right.
removed that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think if they delegate it to the planning board, you'll be running the entire hearing and conducting the entire process, and that we will have an attorney here to help you with that if we get to that point. Otherwise, I don't think there is a role for the planning board in the special use permit process. There's absolutely a role in rezoning and land use plans and text amendments and all those kind of things. And so, and if you think about the way things played out, we shifted from a decision of should we allow this particular project as a special use permit to a decision of in what circumstances or in what locations and with what regulations should we allow townhouses?
Right.
And you all basically came up with that. That was very involved process for the planning board. So, but it's a legislative process and not a quasi judicial process.
When all this discussions come up as the reason I made a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment, because all they do is quasi judicial hearings. They're trained in it. They know the right questions to ask. And all of the things that you people brought up with the problems of the planning board do it, or being a joint effort. It can't be a joint effort. You know, that was pretty clear. It had to be one decision-making body. And that's why I said the Board of Adjustment. Would I like to do it as a planning board? Yes, sir. I sure would. But I don't know how to get over that hump, you know?
I just don't think it's as critical now since the board passed the changes.
Oh, no, it's way.
You know, I don't think it's as critical now as it was before,
Correct.
you know, so, you know, I'm perfectly
I say just
comfortable with, you know, let's throw it at the board, ask
Yeah.
them what they, you know, what they want to do. If they want us to, you know, to take it, you know, we'll take it. If not, you know.
But they got to
You
be
know,
schooled in this decision. You know, if they're going to say, well, we want this to do it, they need a lot more than they got right now. Mr. Frank.
Do we have any indication right today what the big board, how they feel about this?
I don't have a strong
Would they
sense
want to
of their.
retain that? Or are they looking to offload that?
I honestly, I don't know that the discussion's been really driven at this level thus far. So I don't know what their collective or individual positions
how
are.
would we-
on that, so.
put that position before the board for a decision. How do we do that?
I think we should ask Frank to ask.
Yeah. So I guess,
All this?
I guess it depends really on, I've heard Mike's position and.
And I could brief it at the next, you know, that could be part of the brief, is, you know, it's exactly that.
That's right. I mean, I think collectively, you all should probably decide what you would prefer and then maybe share that in your comments, or I'd be happy
Yeah.
to share them during my comments and say, hey, you know, the planning board's discussed this issue. There's 3 options. They tend to favor option A. What do you all think? What's your direction to me to work with them or to you on these things? So that's the way I would handle it.
And you'd have to give them some guidance on how to conduct a quasi judicial hearing. You know, I've attended almost all of the Board of Adjustment hearings, you know, and it's a pretty rigorous process, and, you know, it's not like this, okay? Like what we're having right here.
Yeah.
But they would have to be schooled, as we would have to be schooled in that process to do it correctly.
Yeah, it's a complicated process. I mean, you need the assistance of an attorney or someone who knows what they're doing.
In the other thing in Brett's letter is, it sounded like even you couldn't advise the Board of Commissioners.
Essentially, yes. I mean, I think at the staff level, our role is to help coordinate the process and present the information and not get into recommendations. It's another reason I just really am not a fan of the process. I don't like it. I don't think it's, in my view, it's ultimately not good government, but that's just subjective opinion on my part.
Go ahead.
May I
Yeah.
read some
Oh, you got
questions?
6 people here. lined up with you.
So this is taken from the attorney's brief to us. In order to ensure that all special use permit applicants are provided a fair and impartial hearing, free from outside influence, it is my recommendation that both the UDO administrator and the planning board avoid providing any recommendation
Right.
to the Board of Commissioners.
Right.
You know.
But going back to what I was saying earlier about the evidence and making sure whatever evidence is presented is, you know, actual, like factual information. that would, you help the applicant, right? The UDO administrator helps them with that, right?
Well, they would be preparing their own application and
Right.
submitting their own packet. We would certainly review it to make sure that it's complete and that it's in a format that's understandable for the Board of Commissioners. And then ultimately, it's going to be up to the town attorney to guide them through that process, make sure we're following the right procedures. But
But there's no check on whether it's, I don't know how to say it. You know, I was thinking like traffic is one of the examples where I felt like the applicant last time could have, you know, gotten with the police and said, you know, the existing condos have this many, you know, and there's no more accidents at this intersection, like something like that, that would have been a little bit more, you know, I don't know. how to
So-
say
so-
factual, But
Convincing.
something solid.
yeah, so ultimately, it's really their judgment as that quasi judicial body to decide what the evidence does show and make the decision. So it'd be one thing for me as the neighbor to stand up and say, I don't like this project because it's going to cause too much traffic and, you know, the kids in the neighborhood might get hit. Now, if a traffic engineer stands up and says, you know, a project is like this is going to generate X number of trips, there can be a car going by every 2 seconds or whatever the case may be, that's obviously going to weigh more heavily. And ultimately, it's their job to listen to the evidence presented by all parties and make the judgment.
No, I know. I guess I'm just saying, what's the check on the quality of the evidence? Does that make sense? Who's doing the checking? And I know you're trying to say it's the boards, but I'm saying who does it before it goes to the board?
Yeah, so I think ultimately they are the judge,
Okay.
right? They've got to make that judgment as to whether or not that evidence is impactful and meaningful and truthful going forward. So again, if it's a traffic engineer who's qualified in those things, I would assume they're going to have much more standing than Joe Smith, who lives next door. So. But again, I think one of the key points in the town attorney's memo is the town, the planning board and the board of commissioners has already determined that these uses are consistent with the land use plan and that they're reasonable through the legislative process. So there's not the need for that statement again. It is presumed to be consistent and reasonable. And then it's a matter of going through that hearing. And again, you have to separate, I know it's probably hard, you have to separate it from the exercise you went through on those townhouses before I got here in June. Because in that particular case, there hadn't been a previous determination that it was consistent and reasonable. So two different things going on there, and we've rectified that, and I think for the better of the community.
Yeah, I think we fixed the biggest part of the problem by updating, you know, the table of permitted uses. So I think, do we all agree that we want to brief the board at the January meeting?
Just ask.
Yeah, just
I think we got to do something, Susan, you know, because there's that, we got what, 80-90% of the SUPs are gone. So that 10% could be just as problematic as the ones we've eliminated. And so we really do, we have a responsibility to address that. And so how it comes out, I would just like it clear. I favor the Board of Adjustment at this point, but I certainly could go
So-
another way if I really, really understood what the process was.
But what I'm picking up on this is how, of the three bodies, there's only going to be one that makes a decision.
Correct.
Presumably, it'll be a thorough evaluation of the facts. It's going to be a fairly responsible role.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I have this in my mind, the big board, this is my bias, is they don't have the time and maybe not the inclination to get into the nitty gritty. I don't know, I may not be fair.
I would agree with
Say
you,
that.
sitting through 22 years of that stuff, that they wouldn't get
So
into
if
the
that's
details.
true, then they're going to be looking at two options, either the adjusters or us. Yeah. If you put it to them, the way you're talking about.
But the nitty gritty,
Right now, they have that responsibility.
but the nitty gritty would all be taking place within an event that's run by the attorney.
Well, it is now. If if you think back to let's not talk about the townhouses because that was insanity. But the storage unit issue.
Yeah.
There was, there was a long list of evidence why that should not have been approved.
You're here.
Yet they were told,
It's here.
that it was right to approve it, and they approved it. And I think that if they went back and got into the weeds on it themselves, probably would say, "Ooh, that's not what they told me," So that, that's an issue. You have to dig in to some of
It
this.
almost seems like that the only side that would be presented would be the opinion of the community, and then the defendant. There would be no prosecution. There would be nobody on the other side saying, no, this is a bad idea. We shouldn't do this unless it's the community. All you have is the person who's advocating for it, who has had all the time in the world to go down every single little law and rule and regulation and say, this is why it complies. This is why it complies. This is why it complies. But all the rest of us
And
are
that's
just
what
showing
they
up
did.
because we don't want our kid to get hit.
That's so in that meeting, in that evidentiary hearing, that's what their attorney did. Their attorney said all this stuff, but it wasn't valid.
Right. So that's my point.
It was-
You don't
know,
have
but it-
another group that has had the time and
Right.
inclination and
Mhm.
energy to say, no, that's not right. No, that's not.
Yeah, so that was, that was frustrating because it was just such a long list of reasons why
Yeah.
it didn't.
I have a
So,
question about that. It's kind of a simple question. That storage unit, you said there's a lot of reasons why they should not have approved it, but the way it was before was old, dilapidated, dirty, falling down, and now it looks a whole lot better. So can you explain?
Yes, let me address that, because that's the exact, I asked myself that question. Under the old system, that wasn't in the table of permitted uses, okay? So it was, anybody who ever reviewed that decision would say, well, it didn't come out the right way. But when.
The original building was not.
Correct.
Correct.
It was wrong to start with, and it was wrong to extend it. So what they would have to do it today, I agree with you that it's nicer now than what it was, because for 23 years, I sit here and watch, something dilapidated, and now it's much nicer. But what they would have had to done is they would have had to lobby the Board of Commissioners to put it in the table of permitted uses. They couldn't get a variance on that wasn't listed.
And it wouldn't have been able to grandfather it because it's been there so long.
No,
well, because it had been,
In the first place.
yes.
well, that and because it had not been a business in use for many, many years. So, yeah, basically.
Yeah, a lot of times if something is non-conforming, there's a business running, the business shuts down for a period of time, they can't renew the business after that. That's how strong that is. And that thing flew through like, just like that.
Frank, for your benefit, when I was reading the letter from the attorney, I think it's just point general. The only thing that I have heartburn over is that I understand that you need to be impartial for everybody, but I didn't hear anything about the town. Like, what are they gonna do to make sure it's fair for the towns, right? For the town. And I understand we created the legislative process, which got rid of a lot of that stuff. But I guess I'm just looking at it like, for all the reasons that have been discussed up here, who guarantees this Cape Carteret thing, that, like you're saying, right? We're gonna get up there, present, and then we're gonna find ourselves with a situation like a storage all over. So I guess from a citizen's point of view, that's what I didn't read in the letter. I get the attorney looking at it from the applicant's point of view, but, we talked about the need for our town to make sure that things are being followed and stuff. We don't want a situation like that. Somebody's just getting up there, put stuff forward.
Yeah, so what I would submit to you is that whether it's the Board of Adjustment or the Planning Board or the Board of Commissioners, they are representing the town. Their job is to consider everyone's concerns, both the resident, the developer, the applicant, the attorney, and anyone who's interested and has standing in that particular question. They have to consider everybody's concerns. So the interests of the people of the town are absolutely considered, but they're considered along with everyone's a part of the town. All of those different entities are important and have a voice in these decisions. And that's ultimately why you have elected officials to finally make the decisions. But again, they are looking out for the people in the town. So I don't think it's a matter of whether or not one group's represented or one group's telling the truth. I think it's really a matter of what group do you want to make the decision and conduct the hearing. That's really the question going
And I
forward.
can just say, these people are representing the town body, not necessarily the citizens. Whatever process is followed, they want to make sure that it does end up in court, that that the town is well represented as having followed proper procedure. That's what this is.
You know, I think that's the right thing to say. I've been to a bunch of the planning board, Board of Adjustment hearings, and the chair of that board runs the meeting. The attorney is there, and occasionally they have to correct something, or they may ask the attorney's opinions. But it is that chair that runs that meeting and does really quite a good job in these quasi-judicial hearings. It's almost like when you get in there, sometimes you'll have, if you're watching a court case, you'll see an attorney question a witness, which that happens with this board. They're really trained. That's all they do. And that's why I'm there. But, you can talk me into about anything on this, but I just want to make sure that we fix the thing so that the last 10% of these SUPs aren't like, that have a way to be handled.
I mean, that's
Can I make a suggestion, perhaps we consider, when we have controversial things like these SUPs or whatever, the storage or the townhome, something like that, is there not a process where we could maybe put this on a ballot for the town to vote on the next time?
Holy cow, you know what that costs to put something on the ground? What, your taxes raised?
So actually, the short answer is no. There's no statutory authority to have community-wide referenda on those kind of questions. In some states, there are, like you'll see lots of different states where they're deciding on a particular policy issue. But in North Carolina, there are very few opportunities for a vote on a policy decision by the community. But one thing, so I'm ignorant to a large degree when it comes to the car wash issue that you all are discussing, but
Car wash issue.
no, I'm not a storage unit. I just looked at car wash. I'm sorry. So, the storage units, gosh, please forgive me. I was literally just looking at car wash.
We can't have car washes here, Frank. Don't even bring it up.
Okay, good to know. But the little bit that I've heard about the storage unit issue is maybe there was a question about whether or not it was an existing non-conforming use and the degree to which they could expand. And that would be a completely different question than whether or not a special use permit should be granted for that particular use. So I throw that out there. I don't know any of the context or the discussions, but sometimes it's important to realize that there are different processes at play here. And sometimes people understandably get them confused, and there's different rules for the different processes.
Well, all of those questions came up during the special use permitting process. That's when all that discussion even came up.
We don't need to rehash
Yeah.
it, but I'm not sure why that would have been considered as a special use permit, but.
It was, the decision was made, that was the first one we got, actually, the special use permit, that basically everything was going to be a special use permit.
Okay.
And it became like the Wild West.
And so that was the first one after the new UDO?
As soon as it was
No,
out.
we had to stick. That's another thing. Remember the reason that we couldn't apply some of the changes was because we didn't have full approval of the UDO, so they relied on the old, oh my God.
Because I mean, I'm looking through the
So,
table
but
of,
it's history.
I'm looking through the table of permitted and special uses right now, and I should know this by heart by now, but I don't see where we list storage facilities.
don't.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And so, yeah, so my point to you is that if there is a proposal for another storage facility in the future, they would have to go through a legislative process. They would either need to request a rezoning of an existing parcel. Well, it's not even in here. They'd have to request a text amendment to add storage facilities to the table of permitted and special uses. That would absolutely go through, first of all, there'd be public notices and public hearings and so forth. It would go through the planning board. Y'all would hash it out, and then it would go to the Board of Commissioners and they'd make the final decision. So
That's what they did.
I think it's a better
Okay, that's-
process and a more involved and transparent process.
So what I would like to do is take, during next month's brief to the board, we go ahead and just, kind of throw it at them. If they want to continue to have authority for special use permits, give them a list of what are still those 7 special use permitting things. And I think it's worth, just let me see a show of hands on who thinks it should stay with the Board of Commissioners. 1. Who thinks it should stay with the PB? Or who it should go to the PB? No. And who,
Get one vote.
and who with sending it to the Board of Adjustments? 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.
Can I qualify my vote?
Yeah.
For Mike's comment, this board is not trained to conduct that kind of a hearing. I don't feel qualified.
Never
That's
have.
why I'm saying that board
Mhm.
instead of us. So I'm just saying that could change if there was going to be a commitment to retrain this committee.
Well, I mean, it's procedural, right? That's what we would have to be trained in, is procedural. We certainly know
Yeah.
the land use plan and the UDO well enough to dig into that. So I think, I certainly think we're capable.
Well, we are, but let me ask a follow-up question. Let's assume we were trained on it.
Mhm.
Now we become the judicial body that makes the decision. Is that appealable?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Yeah, those decisions are appealed through the courts.
Through the courts.
Yeah.
But what about the Board of Commissioners?
No,
Would they be second guessing the work product of this group,
so
those conditions?
whoever makes the decision, it is appealed through the court system.
Okay,
It doesn't go to a higher level of the governing body.
I got you.
And if we make a decision as a quasi judicial board of hearing, and we're subjected to an appeal from the applicant, and it costs the town a fortune, we could all be fired. It's that simple. I mean, the planning board has been fired before. We certainly know that. So that's where I say the elected officials should have the buck. The buck should stop with the elected officials. And if they do things that the citizenry doesn't like, kick them out. I wish we had elections every 2 years again. Really,
That's a good point.
really,
That's a good point.
really. If they're not answerable to the citizens, then what good are they? Now for every 4 years.
4, well, yeah, 4 and 2.
And,
Yeah,
well,
depending on the term.
if they rotate.
Yeah, we have a hybrid system. 3 people are up every 2 years, but 4 of the 5 serve a 4-year term. 1 person serves a 2-year term.
Well, so the numbers I have is Board of Commissioners, staying with the Board of Commissioners is 1 vote, staying with,
Changing mine.
Wait. I'm hoping somebody's gonna change a vote.
I changed mine.
And I like what you're saying. I totally get it that you want them to be answerable to the people, and I get it. I just feel like the couple that we've had just went so poorly, in my
Yeah.
opinion, that I don't know that we can recover from it. I don't know. Maybe we can. Maybe they need training on the process better. I don't know.
Well,
It just did not go well.
I only, are they capable of doing that? I think so, but it hasn't been the way they do things. You know, I sat up there for 12 years, and back when we had 2 meetings, the work session meeting, the regular meeting, I was at every one of those, and never did they, even on the biggest items, ever get down in the weeds that you need to get to do the citizens what they're due. You know, a thorough and comprehensive, fair review. I just don't see it happening up there. You know, it's kind of, being up there and being down here is 2 different things. And that's why I'm saying the Board of Adjustment, who does that well, runs these quasi-judicial
So,
meetings.
you know, I'm teetering between these 2 points here, these 2 opinions. But one of the things that I think it's important to consider is the level or the impact of the decision. Is it a tiny decision? Is it a medium-sized decision? Is it a big decision? Now, I mean, these could be very big decisions, you know, for the town when they're voting on a special use permit. So that's why I would kind of lean towards the Board of Commissioners making that call, because they're elected, they're responsible. But, you know, if it's a small decision, then maybe a subordinate board could handle it, could do it.
I don't think you have the luxury of making that distinction before you grant the authority.
No, you don't.
That's
To
right.
the governing body.
That's right.
Whatever comes.
Mhm.
You know,
That's
if
true.
it's- If it's the Board of Adjusters, they take all comers.
But, and I think we've reduced the list, so and we've reduced that sentence where it was like, anything else can be, you know,
Yeah.
so I feel like it is a smaller task than it was before.
I would go the exact opposite way. Now that we have reduced the number, the ones that come up are going to be more controversial and a bigger impact. Because we've kind of hashed out all of the things that, you know, are clear. These ones that come up in the future may be less clear and may be more controversial.
One point, this is history, but on the, I keep calling them condos, isn't what they are, townhomes. When that thing came up, that was a big issue, and that was controversial. And I'm not sure what would have happened with that thing had the applicant not withdrawn the application at the last minute. You know, pardon?
Why speculate? Let's just.
Well, I'm piggybacking on a point that he made. That was a big decision.
Yes.
You know, it has been a single-family development. And by the way, this board did exactly what it should do. We worked that thing hard and came up with some things where you could have those things that didn't create the negative thing that one did. But what he was saying, it's the ones that do come up are going to be important, and that was important, and it just got withdrawn at the last minute. So I'm not trying to speculate where it would have went, but I'm saying they are going to be big decisions. Or could be.
But it did drive good changes. Yeah. So
Yes.
it was very positive in that. It was painful getting there, but it drove some very, very
Absolutely.
positive changes that, and even drove this. I'm sorry. So at the beginning of the meeting, I had talked about public. So in the future, we'll have public comment for those 3 minutes. I'm sorry, Neil, you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to change my.
So in case it's helpful, there are basically 9 special uses left in the table of permitted special uses.
Okay.
Dog training facilities, driving ranges, family amusement and entertainment venues, furniture manufacturing and woodworking, go-kart tracks, manufactured or mobile home parks, pet daycare and boarding facilities, planned residential developments, and private outdoor recreational facilities. So that's all that's left for special use permits. And so I would imagine any one of those things, if it comes up, it'll probably be pretty high profile decision for the community. It would be my guess.
Well, a mobile home park will send people through this roof around here. So, you know, the other things, I don't think they'd cause much controversy.
What I don't understand is when we already have some of these, why are they on the special use permit list? They are now permitted by right, or they were in the zoning ordinance. So why all of a sudden are family entertainment, family amusement, I couldn't write fast enough.
Me
Yeah. I'd be happy. But the short answer is when the UDO was adopted, it converted many of those things to special uses. So
But many of those were permitted by right in the ordinances in B20. And I never did understand why there was a family cabinetry shop that was voted on by the commissioners to be allowed in B20. And all of a sudden, was that on your list?
I think it was in only in a certain area.
Wood shops.
yeah, so if you recall the discussion we had, I think at one of the last few meetings, we classified those as building trade contractor shops, and this board suggested they be made permitted uses, and the Board of Commissioners approved that. That's part of the change they just made last Monday.
No, there was a woodworking cabinetry that was allowed over there in the.
By McDonald's,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, but then that was taken out.
Well,
But
now that would fall under SUP.
Right, that's why I'm saying, why?
Well, I think it's, if you think about the potential impact, if, for example, as somebody said, an entertainment center, well, that might, let's just say, for example, the golf course property, which is zoned R30, became available, okay? You know, you could have something that would dwarf this small town. And the same thing with a furniture shop.
You know, people who say that about the golf course being redeveloped, it's just a bugaboo. It's not gonna happen in two.
It's just a,
Yeah,
It's just-
but I just don't even want to hear that.
All right, well,
Because the
forget that.
fairway-
Let's say some of the bigger properties in the triangle wanted to put a amusement park or a cabinet shop that was like a factory that you would see down in Winston-Salem, you know, back in the furniture days. You know, that's the SUP will allow us to put conditions on that thing to minimize it.
Yeah, I think there's value in the SUPs for anything that we do feel like we want to put additional conditions on, especially large scale, commercial, outdoor entertainment. Because now you're talking light, parking. So I think it's reasonable that those be SUPs.
I'm gonna say,
Um,
I'm just thinking.
I mean, there's, the board, we could always go back and revisit those 9. I don't know that there's a reason. Remember that whoever the decision-making body is for SUPs can approve the SUP without conditions. So they can approve it just as if it was permitted by right, without putting, in other words, without putting additional conditions on it.
I'm sorry. Would you
The
repeat
board, whoever the decision-making body is on the SUP can choose to approve the permit
With no conditions.
with no conditions. So it would basically be, exactly the way it currently is. But, I mean, things like, additional lighting,
Yeah, and but if we're,
Ingress and
on the
egress.
contrary, if it were permitted use, as long as they meet the setbacks and other things that are in the
Right.
ordinance,
Yeah,
they could do
enough.
anything they want. So
Right.
the SUP gives whoever makes a decision, putting conditions on that
I
limit it.
understand what I just question the use on this list or the presence on this list of things that were previously allowed by right.
Or would you like to review an axe throwing facility?
Well, that was Frank's example. That was Frank's example. As long as it's inside a building, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
But,
that was my position.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just.
We can throw axes in here if you like.
I like it. I like
Oh,
it.
dear. Don't say that.
Qualification for entry.
Okay, so did you want to change your vote to what?
Board of Commissioners.
Your
Yes.
vote was for Board of Commissioners?
No, I was,
No.
yeah.
Oh, yours was? Okay, so it's 2-3.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually didn't vote. I'll have to think about it.
Well, you called us, you ought to say what you think.
I honestly do not have an opinion on who the decision-making body is. I have a very strong opinion on the information that gets to the decision-making body,
Mhm.
but we have no control over that.
That's right.
As-
I'm with you.
That's just, so, that's just something I have to just suck up. That's just, that's it.
You can help,
Just
you can
wrong.
be an
That's what it's
advocate.
gonna be.
So. But the answer, I think the answer is that nobody feels like it should come to the PB. So,
So based on that, I think this decision squarely sits in the hands of the big board. Since
Yeah.
they have the authority to begin with.
Mhm.
They'll delegate or not delegate as they see fit. And why would they be interested in our?
yeah, don't get me started. Okay, so are we done with that? Anybody have any save rounds? Can we move
So
into-
you're going to take it to the board in January?
In January,
So-
I will brief, that will be part of my brief. Honestly, I don't even know what I'm going to say at this point
You
because,
got a lot of time.
yeah. So next thing is discussion of regulation of tree removal in Cape Carteret. This is Paxton. You brought this up?
I did not, and I'm against it.
You're against
Oh, my-
I didn't bring up tree removal. I had nothing to do with tree removal. I said, do we need a tree ordinance? And what I wanted to do is, I've thought about this, and if you drive up 58 and you look at, on the right-hand side, they've raised
Yes.
the land there, burned up all the rubble, so it's just a flat ground. And as I said, I feel like this town really did a good job
Yes.
in the past. And we've got a number of properties. I don't even know whether it's worth getting into. And I know it's very controversial when you get into these things by telling landowners what they can and can't do with their property. But I take the example that and Frank brought this up on his stuff, is you look at Emerald Isle, drive through Emerald Isle, drive down through all those roads, and then drive down to North Topsail Beach and compare through. They're both sandbars of the Barrier Island chain. And look at Emerald Isle, because in 1977, somebody had the foresight to put a 35% thing in. Now, I'm not saying we do that. I don't know what we should do, but I wanted to hear from the other board members if they thought it was even worth putting on the agenda for us to get into the weeds with.
Well, we could certainly add something like that for new development. You can't do
Right.
anything for a property that's already.
Oh, no, and this
Oh,
was
you
for
can't-
newer development.
Yeah. That may be something we want to discuss for new residential developments over a certain size, how much has to remain green. If you look at, the neighborhood I live in, North Star Hill, I guess they
Well,
cut down every tree.
yeah, the reason, and that's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up. I was chairing the planning board when that came in, and I went up and walked through that. And for some reason, I don't know why, but that was very sandy and very scrubby pines. There wasn't a lot of big trees in there at all. And I don't know why it was. So that when we put the drainage system in, we had to put these swales in to get the water running out of the infrastructure into there. It worked pretty good, but
Well, we have no standing water up there.
well,
So-
that
so
system
it's
worked. That worked. But
Whatever.
I would want to hear
Yeah.
if any of the other planning board members feel like we should make a tree ordinance something that we get deeper into. I don't want to decide anything tonight. I don't have a real strong opinion one way or the other, but I think it's worthy of discussion.
For what, this is what I would, I'll give it to you in a minute, Pat. What is driving that? Is it because we want it to look pretty? Is it because we want to screen the, something we don't want seen from the road or whatever? Or is it to address flooding?
All of the above.
Okay.
That's what that stuff does. I don't have the, I just think that if you go back and you look at Old Cape Carteret and even Bayshore to some extent and Star Hill, those old neighborhood, people, they'd sell a lot and people would say, well, I'll put the house like this and I'll save that tree, that tree. And if you look around, it was done pretty well. People situating houses. And those trees do a lot, especially the indigenous trees, the pin oaks or white oaks and the live oaks here. They give up their leaves before a hurricane will blow them down. Now those pine trees, I would get rid of those things because they come right over. But maybe it's something we want to do. Maybe we don't.
I think it's worth discussing.
Yeah.
I just think we have to have a very specific reason and a goal for why we want to do it, and not just come up with an arbitrary 35% and, without having real.
Well, it's for all the reasons
in-
that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Why you would do that, why you leave trees on a lot. The windbreak that you get from some of these big trees like that. But, I'm not hung up, and, it isn't like our town's been here since 58 and, it really, you should do it in much earlier than this, but maybe it's something we say, it isn't worth it, But I think I'd like to hear from everybody after they had a chance to think about it and see what they think, whether we want to do anything at all.
I think it's worthy of discussion.
Yep, Patsy.
To answer your questions, Star Hill North is comprised of 70 acres. Bless you. When my mother died in 2001, I had to raise inheritance taxes. Okay, I had to sell something to get enough money to pay the feds. The first outfit I went to was the North Carolina Coastal Federation. North Carolina Coastal Federation, Todd Miller, the greenest outfit in Carteret County. And I said, okay, boys, here's your chance. Put together a consortium of conservation to buy this 900 acres so it'll never be taxed. And by gosh, they did, almost. During the time they were trying to gather the money in order to take that out of development, and miles on Pettiford Creek, waterfront, gorgeous property. They didn't do it quite as fast as I needed the money to pay the feds, which is 9 months from day to death, right? 9 months I had to raise this money.
You could have gotten an extension.
Well, yeah, but then you have to pay interest.
2032A.
Anyway, so these two fellows came to me and said, we want to buy some of this property. And I went to the North Carolina Coastal Land Trust, who were the Miller Hurlovich and Janice Allen, who were putting this consortium together. And I said, I need to sell you this property. I need money. Can you do it any faster? No. And I said, well, will you let me sell 70 acres to these fellows to develop? None of it waterfront. And they said, yes. Now, the reason that there were no trees in there, or substantial trees, was that the soil was so sandy and drained so well. And they only took the best sandy soil that would perk for septic tanks. You'll see in the outline of the subdivision where they left a little piece because it was not as good for septic tanks.
Yeah, in St. Augustine, there's that little cutout. Yeah.
That's why.
Mhm.
But anyway, that was the deal. And that's why Star Hill North is how it is. And the rest, we did a bargain sale. We gave them a bargain sale price of less than we sold to these developers at $10,000 an acre. And that was done. Okay. They should have given me the Pelican Award that year. I'm kidding. But that's one thing. Now, Deer Creek is one of the nicest subdivisions in town. It used to be a tobacco field and a melon patch. There were no trees there. But Barrington Page and I took oaks from Bonita Street and put them on the property lines. And there are beautiful oaks there now, those that haven't been cut down by property owners or blown down in a storm. So people do plant what they want.
How long ago was that?
That was 89. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there are provisions. I mean, people do care. I care what trees are planted and how things look. Pine trees are a disaster waiting to happen. The town was logged in the 80s, and there was all this outcry. I had one lady, sweet lady, who came to me and said, the logger went in and cut my lot. It was on Neptune Court, which at the time was not paved. And hers was one of 1 or 2 lots ever sold, because the map was recorded, but the road was never paved. And so I said, I sympathize with you. The logger is at fault. The lines were clearly marked and surveyed to tell him to stay out of your property. However, I will give you your choice of 3 lots on paved roads, and you choose and we'll swap. And she did. And she built a house, and there was controversy there because it was the first house in Cape Carteret with a metal roof. Yeah. And then she came to me very shamefaced 3 years later and said, I just paid $1,500 to cut every pine out of my yard. Honest, I mean, I've lived here. I've worked here for 53 years. And I love my live oaks. And yes, I cut the pines out of my yard to allow the live oaks to spread. And I've tried to save live oaks in lots that I maintained until they were turned over to the heirs, and then they do what they wish. But I do not want to see another layer of what people can and cannot do with their property, particularly for trees. People have allergies. Cedar trees are not good for fruit trees. You know, but, and it's worth discussing, of course, but Lordy, let's do something worthwhile, like making sure that people at Star Hill take out their diseased trees. What's been done about that?
Yeah, nothing at this point.
We have an ordinance, or we used to have an ordinance on the books that said if somebody has pine beetles in a tree and they're notified, they should take it out. And I provided the town with a list that my friend, the golf course GM, went around and made a list of people with dead and diseased trees in their yard. So
Is that at the homeowner's expense?
no, sir. Oh, yes, sir. Of course, it's at the homeowner's expense. So the next door neighbor to one of the lots my children own recently contacted us and said, look, we can hear the beetles chewing. Immediately, and you can hear beetles chewing. We immediately took that tree down, and they took one of theirs down. And that prompted this list to come to the town manager of here's a list of diseased and dead trees, and we need to fulfill our ordinances. Let's fulfill what we have on the books to save the canopy, to save the existing living trees, and not just put another.
Yeah. There is something in the land use plan that a couple of commissioners were comfortable with, and I think they ended up pulling it out. I have to go back and look at it, which was exactly that, a provision to help property owners
Yes.
save valuable trees or remove problem
Yes.
trees. Not a problem just to the homeowner, but a problem
Yes.
to everybody. Because saving a tree is important
Yes.
if it's helping to address flooding, right?
Yes.
Removing a tree if it's diseased, but I think they weren't comfortable with it. That was pulled out. I'll have to go back and look at it again.
Well,
And that wasn't town money. That was utilizing some other, I don't know where that kind of money comes from, to do something like that, but that was for the town. It was one of our goals, was for the town to utilize that type of opportunity.
if I have a disease, a communicable disease, it's my duty to either cure it or eradicate it
Mhm.
and not spread it to my neighbors.
Yeah.
Same thing goes with trees. And that is still on our books, is it not?
I believe that it is, yeah. And
Yes.
I do have the list.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the town,
Well, it's not in the UDO, it's in the Code of Ordinances.
Right. right, and the town should enforce that before we plunge into something. Yes, it's worth discussing and considering, but I just don't want something like Emerald Isle, Pine Knoll Shores have, where you have to get a permit to cut anything over 3 inches. I've experienced that before with folks that are on rented spaces over on Emerald Isle coming to me and saying, well, the town said I couldn't cut this big pine tree. And I said, you go back to the town and you get that in writing, signed by somebody that says you may not remove that pine tree, and when it falls on your trailer, you get a new trailer. You know, seriously, that's how serious it was. And they finally let him cut the pine tree down before it fell on his trailer. Anyway. Sorry.
What about, you want to, Madam Chair, do you think it's worth having we've been here for a while tonight, bringing this discussion up at another meeting to see, I want to hear what the other people have to say.
Worthy of discussion.
Pardon?
Worthy of discussion.
Okay.
Okay, so Mike, do you want to put something together?
Just
And
points to
then-
consider.
Yeah,
Yeah, I could draft up
Yes.
some kind of a little things you can look at and things to consider that would promote discussion on it. And then, and I have, unlike the SUP, which I wanted to see get resolved because it's such an important issue, if this doesn't go anywhere, that's fine with me too. I just think it's something, when you see what's going on, it's the other thing, was driving through Star Hill, and there was one lot that was being developed, and they raised that lot. There's one tree on it, and every other place, people chose to do differently. So I think it's just worthy of discussion.
And they might choose to plant trees that they like and they're not allergic to, and that will grow and be beautiful and absorb water.
30 years
and
later.
Yeah, certainly, but I mean, you gotta plant a tree.
Yeah. 2 Bradford pears and a,
Evil.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're outlawing in places now.
That's the kind of stuff that gets going that people just, don't pay attention to over time. And you have these problems. Just like, I'm gonna let my little fish out in the water and then,
Naked.
yeah, all kinds of weird stuff happens.
Okay, so let's,
I'll draft something up, send it to
Yeah,
you, and you
for-
can put it
for
on the agenda for
another meeting.
another meeting.
Anybody have any save rounds on the tree issue?
I'm sorry?
Anything else on the tree issue? The planning board meeting schedule, Barb, what did you have on that? Number 5? Were you gonna?
Yeah, the Board of Commissioners approved the 2023 meeting schedule last Monday. I just put it in there just so you'd have the dates available. It's the same meeting schedule that we've been using the last few months. It's the 3rd Tuesday of each
Yeah.
month at 6 o'clock, once per month. So the next meeting will be on Tuesday, January 17th.
Okay, sounds good. Frank, you have anything?
Just a couple of things. The Board of Commissioners approved the ordinance amending the table of permitted and special uses at their meeting last Monday. There was a request by one of the commissioners for the planning board to take another look at bumper boats and batting cages. And so I will schedule that for discussion at some point in the future. And I may even consider that as part of maybe a broader set of amendments to the UDO going forward. My goal is to take a shot at simplifying the UDO, and I may incorporate it into that. But essentially, I think the ask was the ordinance they approved, change those from special uses to permitted uses. And the question was, should they in fact be special uses? So I bring that back to you for discussion
Bumper
again.
boats and what else?
Batting cages.
And batting cages?
So the ordinance now classifies those as permitted uses. And the board approved that, and they approved it unanimously at the meeting last week. There was maybe just some concern about those two uses. And what I told them is I would bring that back to you at some point in the future. But really what I want to do when I can find the time to do this is really take a shot at simplifying the entire UDO and bring it back to you all to dig into and hopefully be comfortable with it. But
I mean, a lot of those things, the bumper boats and the batting cages and all that other list that's on the, driving ranges and all that really is, outdoor family entertainment, and maybe everything just needs to be lumped into that. For permitted by right, list what those things can be.
I think that would be a good approach to
Yeah.
take. I think that would simplify things and those are the kind of things I'm going to be working on going forward.
So did they have a problem with bumper boats and batting cages, or they were for?
Cameron Watts asked that that be taken back to the planning board.
Yeah, I think in talking to Commissioner Watts is the one who brought it up. He thought like batting cages. Years ago, when I could still hit a baseball, I went down to one in South Carolina and spent a couple hours in the cage. And that thing was, they had about 20 pitching machines, lights all over the place. So his point was, these things can get big and lights and noise and stuff like that. So that's why he.
But we have light and noise ordinances.
Yeah, but
So just because you could have if you approve of batting cages by right, they still have to be within the ordinance for light. And our town doesn't have like a light discipline or light pollution like Bogue has, but we really should look at that too.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and the problem with that is a batting cage was a special thing, needed lots of lights because you can't see that thing. It's a game that's really best played in the daylight. So.
But that's the thing. If a developer wants to come in and develop batting cages, they have to do it within our ordinances. They can't just say, well, I want my batting cages, but I don't want to follow your ordinance for light. Sorry, too
Well,
bad, so sad.
It might be where he was coming from is it might mean they couldn't do it because of the other lighting ordinance that had a different intent. Okay. Just light pollution. It may.
Well, I think our concern about lighting is the nuisance of it.
Right.
Like in a residential neighborhood.
Adjacent to one.
Yeah. So, but I mean,
But
I'd
he
love to have
felt
bumper
like
boats
the
and batting
special use
cages.
permit, you could direct.
we did have batting cages here until a couple of years ago, didn't we?
We still do.
Yeah.
Do they run?
They run. They're very expensive to keep up. Not sure he's even gonna keep it.
Oh, I thought that.
Every time I've wanted to use it, it's kind of been.
Yeah, I thought
down
it
or
was.
something.
Yeah, I thought it was
It's been
good.
very problematic. But they limp along trying to keep it for the kids who.
But that's what I see. I think it makes more sense to lump all of these
I
outdoor
agree with
family
you.
amusement things, under one umbrella and list what those things are,
Yeah.
and then make sure that our ordinances support doing that.
That's exactly the approach that I plan to take
Yeah.
going forward. So I'll bring that back to you all at the appropriate time. The only other thing I wanted to mention to you is that we have two members whose terms are coming up next year. Bruce Williamson's term is up on February 8th of 2023. Susan Hall's term is up on May 18th of 2023. So just wanted to remind you all of that. If you have interest in being considered for reappointment, please just let me know that sometime in the next few weeks or so, or in your case, when it gets closer. So, and that's all I have.
Board members, anybody?
Just a question on that, Frank. So like the Board of Commissioners, we also have sort of a staggered tiered appointment. So we have a couple of people with 2-year terms and some with 3-year terms.
Well, actually, I think initially it was set up that way, but they are staggered, but they're all 3-year terms going forward.
Okay.
So we've got 2 folks coming up in 23. We actually have 4 people coming up in 24. And that's one of the things that they all expire. Some of them expire in February, some expire in May, some expire in March. One of the things I may recommend to them at some point is just to set them all up in the same month, whatever month that is, but stagger them with the year.
Bruce, you got anything?
No, I don't.
Paxton, any safe rounds?
Yes, this is for the police department. With the proliferation of 4-way stops, it would be very helpful if the town were to brief its citizenry on who has the right of way at a 4-way stop. I can't tell you how many, and it's been many years since my driver's ed, but even I know that if you come to a 4-way stop simultaneously, the person on the right has the right of way. And I can't tell you how many times I've been motioned on to go in violation. But the thing is, you don't know if they're waving to music and you pull out and they're going to run into you and demand a new car. But it would be very helpful if the police could brief the public. Next, I'm not getting after the police, but it would be so nice when we have meetings if we could have the police cars moved elsewhere for parking. You know, because I normally park either at my office or in the parking lot where the ATM is, just so I can get in the building.
Right. Main reason why most of those cars are parked over, you know,
I see.
and you get one more head, so I think it's some cars we can bring them in and park elsewhere.
And a lot of them park at the Cedar Point building, which is so nice. But anyway, and then the diseased trees. But the most important issue that I want this town to enforce and improve is the stormwater ordinance. I have neighbors that have built up their lots beside me, 2, 3, 4 feet high, and I'm just dreading the next big rainstorm that floods my land with their stormwater. And it's very important. I haven't gotten any traction with that, but I think it's one of the most important issues we face.
Yeah, so I would say to you that my intent is to bring you an improved stormwater ordinance to consider and then ultimately make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. I would submit to you that our ordinance is very vague right now and is very difficult to enforce and involves a lot of subjectivity. So I think the intent behind it is very good, but I think it's very vague and subjective. So hopefully we can come up with a better standard going forward. But that will surely be met with some controversy in the community. Probably the biggest thing for you all just to be thinking about is, you know, roughly 80% of the lots are already developed with a single family home on them. So if you come in and you try to impose a new standard on the remaining 20%, give or take, those folks would have to incur an additional expense and additional trouble that may be worthwhile or may not be. And so that's the question that often comes up in those things. But regardless, I think we need to do a better job.
Don't call me Shirley.
Yes, ma'am.
Sarah? Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Mike? Okay, I don't have anything. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Good work tonight. Go ahead.
Thirded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
There we go. Thank you. Good night, folks. Merry Christmas. I'll see you
Merry
next time.
Christmas.
Please don't forget
So,
to point.
did you pay all?
Yes, thank you.
So you're a watercolor.
This will be the first one in our house.
It's acrylic?
Yeah, let's
It
see
look-
watercolor. 'cause you
Got
had
the
to-
reproduction process?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, they very much look like watercolors.
yeah. It's because the paper is not, it's very like matte.
My daughter went to North Carolina School.
Is
of
this for
Design,
me?
And, and that's it was tough to get in. And, but
Yes.
as a artist, it is so difficult to make a living at that. Where you can, and she gave it a shot, and just kind of gave it, just could not make a living.